part 2 of my tutorial about el verbo tener. Now we're going to be introducing some examples. So I recommend that you watch part 1 where I explain how to do the conjugations. So if you already understood that and you memorized that, we can continue with the examples. The first example that we have here is we have class on Monday and we need to find out how to conjugate we have. Before we conjugate it though, let's take a look at some new vocabulary that we have here. First of all, we have the word class, clase. Okay, so make sure that you add that to your vocabulary list so you can read it later and fully memorize it. And then we have the day of the week, Monday, which in Spanish is lunes. Now this is interesting. In English we say class on Monday. However, when we're talking about an event happening on a day of a week, we use an article. In this case we use el, lunes, instead of using the translation of on, which would be en. We use el instead. Okay, so if you wanted to say Wednesday, Thursday, you will still use el, the article, instead. Now let's move on to the conjugation itself. How do we say we have? Okay, I'll give you a few seconds for you to write it down. Okay, let's see if this is what you wrote down. We have is nosotros. Nosotros tenemos. Nosotros tenemos clase el lunes. We have class on Monday. Now, in Spanish, you don't usually use the pronoun nosotros as you do use it in English. So we can erase nosotros and have only the conjugation tenemos, and it will still mean the same thing. Tenemos clase el lunes. So make sure to understand that you can write it both ways, but this is the most widely used, just using the conjugation. Tenemos clase el lunes. Now let's move on to the second example. Again, let's take a look at some new vocabulary here. We have the word for bike, which is bicicleta. Okay, make sure to add it to your list of vocabulary. Bike is bicicleta. And in this case, there is no change in translation. We still use an indefinite article, a bike, una bicicleta, because bicicleta is feminine, and this is an indefinite article, una bicicleta, a bike. Now, another thing to remember is when you write down questions in Spanish, you have to use 2 question marks. One in the beginning, like this one, and one at the end. Okay? Now I'm going to give you a few seconds for you to write what's the conjugation of you have. Okay? Now let's see if this is what you wrote. Before we write down the conjugation, you're probably wondering what happened to the word do. In case you don't know yet, in Spanish, you don't use it at all when asking questions. Yes, you don't use the word do at all. You just write down the conjugation directly. So that's a nice word that you don't have to memorize every time you need to ask a question in Spanish. You have is tú tienes. Now, this is interesting because this is one of the words, as we mentioned in part 1, the conjugation for you is tie-nes, tie. So make sure you remember that. That's different from the infinitive, which it was ten. So tú tienes. And again, And in Spanish, we don't usually use the pronoun. So you don't need to write it down. And you can just simply say, ¿Tienes una bicicleta? Do you have a bike? Again, ¿Tienes una bicicleta? Okay? I hope this is well understood, and we will move on to even more examples in part 3.